They kept searching for Hi-Brasil for 500 years. Put that into perspective. This is true. This is a real fact. 5 centuries of captains staring at this same empty horizon, convinced the island had to be there because it was on the map. Not one of them thought to ask the obvious question until it was far too late. What if the map is wrong? What if the water in front of us is telling us the truth? Hey, I'm Dan Herring. Every single week I'm dropping a new video on psychology, philosophy, faith. If you like conversations that challenge you and help you build character, please drop a follow. Let's get back to today's call. We're going back about 500 years. Golden age of exploration. Picture a captain ship standing below deck, unrolling a map, candles flickering, papers old, hand-drawn, covered in these coastlines, current tiny sketches of sea monsters in the corners, right? Where map makers just didn't know what else there was, so they just added stuff. And the captains trust these maps with their life, with his crew's life, the entire voyage. And for centuries, that map included an island that doesn't exist. This is real. It was called Hi-Brasil. Round, mysterious, said to be shrouded in mist somewhere off the coast of Ireland. Google it. Cartographers drew it on official maps starting around the 1300s, and sailors searched for it. Expeditions were funded to go find it. It appeared on maps for over 500 years. The last expedition to search for Hi-Brasil set sail in 1872. And guess what? They never found it. Because it was never there. An island that never existed guided real ships with real captains carrying real cargo and real crews for 5 centuries. Not really because anyone was foolish, but because once something gets drawn onto a map, people stop checking whether it still matches the water in front of them. There's a phrase for this coined by a philosopher named Alfred Korzybski, and it was in the 1930s. The map is not the territory. Meaning the map is just a representation. It's just a drawing, someone's best guess made at a particular moment with the information that they had. The territory is the real thing, the actual coastline, the actual rocks, the actual water, moving, changing every single day, whether or not anyone is updating the map. And the moment you start trusting the map more than the territory in front of you is the moment you're going to run aground. You're going to hit the rocks. Not because of sailing, but because you're not looking at what's in front of you. Every one of us is carrying a map, not of coastlines, of ourselves, right? It got drawn early. Most of it was probably before you were even old enough to check if it was accurate. A parent once told you, you're too sensitive, and that sketch got drawn onto the map. A teacher said, you're not a math person, and that got inked as a permanent coastline. You went through one brutal relationship, and the map added a warning label across the entire coast of relationships. Dangerous waters, stay away. You failed at something publicly once 10 years ago, and the map still marks that whole region, do not attempt. And here's the problem. Nobody ever goes back and resurveys. The territory changes constantly. You change constantly. The people around you change constantly. But the map just sits there, unrevised, and we keep sailing by it like it's gospel. And here's what makes it worse. Once you trust a map, you start reading the water to match it instead of the other way around. A captain convinced that there are rocks exactly where the map says it is going to see rocks in every single shadow, every patch of foam, every trick of light, because he already decided what he's going to find. Meanwhile, the captain who's willing to actually look might notice the water's moved. That sandbar shifted. The passage that used to be dangerous is clear now. And we do the exact same thing with people. Once we've decided he never listens, we notice every single time he doesn't listen. And we barely register the 4 times this week he did. Not because he didn't, but because we'd already drawn the coastline. And we were reading the water to match the drawing instead of updating a new drawing. That's not memory, that's map defending. How does this play out in a marriage? Because I think this is where it costs a lot of people. Do people get married? In a year or two, there's a rough season. She feels unheard. He feels criticized. They both draw a map of the other person that season, and it's not flattering. Her map of him, he shuts down. He doesn't try. His map, she's never satisfied. Nothing's ever enough. Now, fast forward 12 years. He's grown up. He's done the work. He shows up completely different than he did. She's grown too, softened, learned how to ask instead of accuse. But here's what happened in almost every struggling marriage that I've sat across from, been involved in myself. They're still navigating each other at that 2-year map. He reaches for her and she's already bracing for the man who used to shut down, even though that guy doesn't really exist anymore. She asks him a question and he already hears criticism from 12 years ago, even though she asked it gently. I've sat with couples like this. I've also been the one looking at the old map. Both of them are exhausted. Both of them are convinced the other person hasn't changed one bit. And most of the time, when I ask each other privately to describe who they've become, they'll describe the real, genuine growth. And then they'll walk right back into the room and treat their spouse like none of that applied to them. It's almost like funny, the duplicity, when you zoom out, how easy it is to see the map isn't accurate, except it's not funny at all, right? It quietly kills that relationship. Not because love left, but because the map didn't get updated. And eventually people stop trying to reach someone who only ever seems to see the worst in them. They're not even actually fighting with each other, right? They're fighting with two outdated maps. Standing in for two changed people. It's not just marriages. I see this in fathers and their grown kids. I see this in myself and my not so grown kids. A dad sees their 15-year-old who wrecked the car, who wouldn't listen, who slammed the door, rolled his eyes, and now is treating his 32-year-old son like the kid standing in front of him. Because the last map that he ever drew was that. Meanwhile, his son has built a career, a life. And every time he comes home, he can feel his father sailing straight past the man he's become to go find the teenager that isn't there anymore. You see it happen at work. A boss hired somebody as a junior employee, watches them grow 5 years, get promoted twice, closes deals the boss couldn't even close. And still in every meeting, talks to them like they're the nervous 23-year-old who just started here. Still double checks their work. Still explains things that they mastered 3 years ago. And nobody really in these stories are the villain. They just stopped resurveying. The person in front of them kept sailing into new waters and the map never got updated. So here's a sentence I want you to notice yourself saying this week because I think it's one of the more dangerous ones. I know how this goes. You don't. You know how it went once under different conditions with a different version of the person standing across from you and possibly a different version of you. I know how this goes, is what that captain says right before he sails confidently to an island that isn't there. Some people, when they sense the map might be outdated, they resurvey. They ask the honest question. They test the water instead of assuming, is this still true about you? Is this still true about me? Other people just keep sailing the old chart because at least it's familiar. At least it doesn't require going back out into open water and admitting that they don't actually know what's there anymore. Resurveying, to be clear, is uncomfortable. It means admitting the map that you've been so sure of might be wrong. It means the story that you've told yourself about you, your kids, your marriage, your career might need updating. But the ships that wrecked searching for Hi-Brasil didn't wreck because the ocean was cruel. They wrecked because nobody was willing to say out loud, maybe the map is wrong. And this doesn't just happen between people, right? It happens inside your own head. You made one mistake at 22 and you're still sailing around at 45 like it's still charted water. I'm bad with money. I always self-sabotage. I'm not disciplined. Meanwhile, the territory, the actual current you, has changed in 100, 1,000 ways. And you haven't bothered to notice because you stopped checking the map against the water a long time ago. Some of you are way more disciplined, way more capable, way more ready than your own internal map is giving you credit for. You're just still navigating by a drawing that someone else made of you 20 years ago. Here's the part that makes this hard to fix. A map doesn't announce that it's out of date. There's no warning label. There's no little note that says this coastline hasn't been checked since, or surveyed only once during the worst month of your life. Don't use this permanently. It just sits there. The map just looks exactly as authoritative as it did the day it was drawn. Resurveying cannot be passive. You won't just stumble into it. You have to actually decide to sail back out and check. And that looks like asking your spouse, partner, whoever, is this still true about you? Or am I fighting a version of you that doesn't exist? It looks like trying the thing you told yourself years ago you weren't capable of, just to see if the water is still actually as dangerous as the map claims. It looks like asking someone who knew you at your worst to look at you now, out loud, instead of assuming they've already updated their drawing. Nobody resurveys by accident. You have to choose to sail back into the water. You have to go back out where you assumed you'd already mapped. They kept searching for Hi-Brasil for 500 years. Put that into perspective. This is true. This is a real fact. 5 centuries of captains staring at this same empty horizon, convinced the island had to be there because it was on the map. Not one of them thought to ask the obvious question until it was far too late. What if the map is wrong? What if the water in front of us is telling us the truth? And Hi-Brasil wasn't even the strangest thing on those old maps. I'm sure you've seen it. Look at any old map before the 1500s and you'll find entire sketches of unexplored ocean that they simply just, here be dragons. And that wasn't like we look at that kind of humorously. That was fact. That was real cartographers. Not because dragons were actually there, because the map maker didn't know what was there. And rather than leave it blank, he filled it with the scariest thing he could imagine. A lot of us do that. We do exactly that with the unmapped parts of our life. The parts we haven't explored, a career change, an honest conversation, a boundary we've never set, a version of ourselves we've never tried on. We don't leave those blank. We fill them with dragons. I could never do that. That would destroy everything. People like me don't get to have that. Nobody drew those dragons because they were actually there. They drew them because it was more comfortable to fill in the unknown with fear than to admit, I simply haven't explored it yet. I want you to ask that question about your own life this week. Not what does my old map say about my career, body, faith, marriage, relationship, but what does the actual water in front of me say right now? Today, if I'm being honest. You might find some rocks are still there. You might find a coastline that hasn't changed. Or you might find you've been avoiding a whole coastline that's been open and safe for years simply because the old drawing told you not to go near it. Either way, you won't know until you look up from the map. And the good news buried inside all this is resurveying isn't the dangerous way that the old map warned you it would be, right? The captains who finally sailed past where Hi-Brasil was supposed to be didn't find a sea monster. They didn't find dragons. They found open water, calm, ordinary, unremarkable water. Water that looked exactly like the water on the left side of the map, and on the right side of the map, the danger had only existed on the page. And I think that's true more often than not. The conversation you've been avoiding because the old map says it's going to end in a fight might not. The goal you've written off because the old map says you're not capable, you might be, even if you weren't then. The relationship you've kept at arm's length because the old version of that person hurt you, they might have actually changed the coastline if you're willing to go check. You won't know by staring at the drawing. You only know by sailing out and looking.